Welcome back to the Customer Discovercast. This is your host, Ethan Halfide. This is a massive episode because here we are with Ghalib, the season 2 premiere of the YC Discovercast, and he is the founder and CEO of a Y Combinator backed company, Polytomic. They sync internal customer data to your business systems. Ghalib, thank you. Welcome, and feel free to dive deeper into your background and what your business does.
Sure, my pleasure to be here. So as you successfully described Polytomic, yes, this is true. Let's get a bit more specific about what we do. We are focused on moving data from internal, that sits in internal databases or data warehouses or spreadsheets into business systems. Now, why does that matter? Business teams within companies tend to live in home systems. For example, if you're a salesperson, you tend to live in Salesforce. It's just the app you use day in, day out. It's your central command center, if you will. You really don't care much about what happens outside of it, but you do care about data that sits outside of Salesforce. And in particular, for example, you're a salesperson, you're responsible for some customers, you'd like to see, are they even using your software product? If they're not, maybe they're about to cut the contract, right? How would you know? But all the usage data sits in a database controlled by the software engineers. To extract it and move it over, it tends to require writing code, but we have a no-code web app that lets people set this up in 5 minutes. They can set up a live sync from their engineering database, all the usage data that they want. For example, goes into Salesforce, the sales rep opens up their Salesforce page and sees all the usage data they need without leaving the home system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So kind of the mechanism for distribution for you guys, right? So when you guys started out, how did you kind of, when you planned kind of your growth channels, right? Did you plan on kind of that, they essentially call it the, was it the parasite host growth mechanism, right? So where like say you were with HubSpot, you could be an application that complements HubSpot, or say with Salesforce, you can create an application that complements Salesforce. Is that what you went about with Polytomic?
As far as growth, I mean, since you mentioned when you guys started, our history is a bit varied in that when we started, we actually sort of made the wrong app and actually had this huge struggle selling it. And so we certainly had an idea to fuel growth that actually ended up going nowhere because we had the wrong product and we were selling it to the wrong crowd. Once we learned some things, we completely redid the product back in July. And yes, as far as channels go, I have a long history working in data, so I'm very familiar with the space, and I'm very familiar with those who suffer from this problem. Our methods are just direct sales, to be frank. We just contact people and tell them this is what we have on offer. I know that they're suffering from the problem because I have a history in the industry. And then we get on a call, show them a demo, and move on to make a sale from that. But it is indeed, there's a virus host mechanism in that. I suppose if you want to call it a virus, which doesn't sound too complimentary,
bad, yeah.
but perhaps, but let's go with it. What tends to happen is we'll land to serve people administering Salesforce, for example, right? They want data in Salesforce. What happens though is that the marketing people who live in HubSpot then see what's going on and they go, well, we want data in HubSpot too. And then there's a natural growth there where they start using us as well. The support people who live in Zendesk go, well, we want data in Zendesk as well. And then data starts being piped to them. So there is indeed a natural expansion that takes place. The initial growth, if you will, is very much a manual crank that we turn.
So do you guys really calculate? So what you kind of touched on are very similar softwares, right? And kind of similar niches. And they say, well, our competitor has that. We want that as well, right? So how do you plan kind of that first sale within different verticals?
You know, your first ever sales as a startup tend to be through mutual connections. You know someone who knows someone who knows someone who can intro you. It's actually very difficult to just go from being a nobody to closing a sale with someone who considers you indeed a nobody. And so our first sales were actually just, we knew people who knew people who knew people, and we'd go through a chain of introductions, get to the right person, show them the software, and then that was enough. Wow. But to get that first meeting when you start, it tends to be, historically at least, in B2B startups, you just have some pre-existing connection or a second or third degree connection. There's some chain you can follow to get to that demo.
Yeah. Wow. And I remember based on our previous conversations, we touched on you know, a very interesting approach to, you know, pre-YC. And then during YC, you
Mm,
guys realized a lot was going on. And then post YC, you really had to crank in and then
hmm
dial it in,
Yep.
kind of locked yourself in and, you know, coded it out.
Yep.
I don't want to ruin the story, but talk about that. You know, one, you had to
Sure.
fill out your Y application. What
Yep.
stage were you in when you guys were filling out your Y application?
We actually, when we were filling out the application, we only had an idea. We didn't even have UI mocks. What happened was we filled out the application. We had an interview scheduled, I believe, the week after we submitted. And so I scrambled to, actually, no, sorry. Let me go back. Memory does tend to decay in starter plan because time moves so quickly.
Oh yeah.
Going back, sorry, no, we actually did have UI mocks, but no app when we applied. That's really all we had.
Wow.
We applied with that, and we were dead set. We'd already quit our jobs, and so we were dead set on making this work, YC or not. It didn't really matter. And so we started coding after the application was submitted. I believe a week after submission, my co-founder quit his job and joined. But we didn't have anything working. We got to the interview, we still had no working product. And so the interview was a discussion on our application. And they'd seen the mocks as well. But once we got into YC, it was very much a frantic mission to get coding, even though, of course, in hindsight, we were actually building the wrong product. Our original product was sort of a 2x better product than competition rather than the 10x better situation we have now.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the vision, but it just felt too hard to attack the vision directly. So we sort of attacked a weaker vision, which was actually a mistake in hindsight. And so we went through YC. We had this wrong product, wasn't selling very well. We had a terrible time raising money because also COVID had just hit and investors were skittish. We didn't have much to say as far as customers go. Come July, I think we just realized this and we decided, you know what, let's attack the vision head on. Let's do the hard work. We tossed our product out, frantically rebuilt it, and then ended up closing our first sales, I think early October.
Wow. Yeah. And
it wasn't a straightforward path at all going through YC.
And what year was this from YC to when you guys
was,
did the complete rebuild?
This was last year. And so we started YC in January. And then in July, we tossed out what we had and started building a new
complete rebuild. Jeez. Yeah. Tell us about what was that like if we were a fly on the wall watching two co-founders, energy drinks, like pulling all-nighters, coding, like in the movies, like what were you doing?
The thing is, it would have been like in the movies, except realize there was a COVID lockdown going on. And
so it just felt normal.
two guys in I was alone in my apartment. My co-founder was coding from his house. We chat on Zoom all the time. But this very simple goal was, and we actually had a customer waiting for us. You know, one thing we did was we ran our new app before we had it implemented. We ran some designs by one of our first customers, what ended up being as one of our first customers. We got a huge enthusiastic response. So that was what was fueling us. It was, okay, well, we have this person waiting for us. It really was just frantic coding. You know, it's a certain blissful state when you're only coding because you really have no responsibility, really. There are no customers filing bug reports. No one's asking for features. No investors are hassling you about revenue growth. You know, there's nothing going on. It's just you coding. There's a certain parable, perhaps, with Adam and Eve living in the Garden of Eden with no responsibility. You know, at some point they get banished to planet Earth. That's when they realize what aging means, what disease means, what murder means. You know, all the ugly truths of life. Or you know, maybe another analogy is that college students who spend the summers sort of living with their parents, right? What responsibility do you really have? Nothing, which feels blissful, but the real flavor in life is responsibility. You know, we're all building towards achieving something that makes us responsible to others. And so for me, anyway, as blissful as it was, there was this desperate need to get to a situation of responsibility and away from this fake existence.
Absolutely. Wow. That was beautifully said, man. That was almost poetic, you know? And that's amazing. So now we're into this garden of responsibility, we can call it. You have your first sale. You know, it's proof of concept, right? So, you know, within the first 90 days of when you close that sale that was already waiting for you, you have this completely rebuilt product. How did you guys go about the next 3 months of that? Like, did you scale up?
Sure.
You know, everyone talks about hockey stick growth with you know, that's it's hit or miss, right? Not everyone gets that because it's a little different, but how did that go?
And sure. And in particular, by the way, I'll note when we closed our first sale, we didn't even have a finished product yet. It took us an extra 2-3 weeks to scramble to make it production ready. And the first sale in particular, yes, we had someone waiting, but we hadn't really gone through their boss, who was actually the one signing off. And so there was some navigation to be done. Once that was closed, we scrambled to make our product a bit more production ready. After that, when you close your first 1 or 2 customers, you do get to start dropping names, right? So you are a nobody as you send out your emails out to other strangers, but you do get to say such and such company who you've heard of are using us. And that gets some people at least willing to listen to you. But the hockey stick growth, again, does with B2B direct sale companies, it does tend to take some time. There's, again, a certain engine to be cranked. Paul Graham had this great analogy of, founders just crank the engine, sort of cars in the olden days. You just crank them really fast and only then does the engine start get going on its own. And there is a similar situation. You just do more of the same, except you get to drop a few logos. And you really just do that for a while. It turns out to be your strategy for a while until you get big enough with a brand that draws in people. Yeah. But it is indeed, more of the same, except you do it with more confidence, right? Because your product is being used by actual people. You're not a shy, timid, dare I even say, fearful founder, one who's scared of your own product being deployed because no one has tried it just yet.
Right.
You develop a bit more of a confidence to go through the slog.
Yeah. A couple of iterations as well, I'm sure. Like if you encounter any bugs and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. And there's always stuff that comes up, for us in particular, because we hook into customers' data, we are beholden to how their data is shaped and formed. And there are all sorts of shapes and flavors of data out there. And the bugs do come up, you fix them, you move on. I will never forget though, negotiating marketing, it wasn't even much of a negotiation, but just getting our first sale, I was sweating buckets talking to the person who was about to sign the contract. Because you just think to yourself, well, who am I? Right?
Imposter syndrome kicks in, right?
Exactly, right? You just think, well, this product's going to be the foundation of the whole sales team will depend on the data piped by this product. We're just 2 guys coding in our houses. It's our first deployment. Who are we to claim anything regarding reliability of this thing? Who knows? Of course, what you anchor on is startup history, which is what every founder goes through. You anchor on the fact that you will respond quickly to bugs. Just accept that. They'll come up. As long as you respond, customers tend to be okay. But it's hard to internalize this when you're starting out.
Exactly. You're on a road that's, to say less traveled is an understatement, right? You're paving your own road. And it's hard to say, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? Because there's no real guideline for it. There's business books, there's startup books, but you're writing your own story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. There's something, I always like to think about the abstract human phenomena. And, what's the abstract one here? With human beings in general, I think, excuse me, it seems to be very difficult for some reason to learn lessons without experience. I'm really not sure why, so the medical profession, like there's a trope where every new doctor is told, oh, you'll mess up with a patient at some point. You'll kill a patient at some point, unintentionally, right? A bad diagnosis and so on. Every new generation is told this, and yet we've had doctors for years, right? Why is it so inevitable that people make mistakes absent experience? I'm not so sure. It's like relationships, right? There's all the dating advice in the world doesn't prepare one for maintaining a marriage.
Absolutely.
And yet it's still the case that we just somehow haven't figured out, maybe it's impossible, how to transfer very standard advice such that it's implanted in people's heads. Experience tends to be maybe the sole teacher over and over again. And it's just no exception with startups.
That's amazing. Yeah. Are you a big reader? Do you read a lot of books, or do you prefer to just act?
Sure. I like to read books, yes, in various topics. Sure.
And I was going to say, it's easy to read a book. I mean, just next to me, I have about 6. It's easy to read a book and think, I'm an expert on this topic. I know how many people read these books. And years ago, I thought the same, but you just highlighted on an amazing point. Like, you don't actually know until you do it, and doing it, executing is the make or break moment, right?
Yeah. There's something, perhaps it's not quite that you don't know, but maybe that you forget when you're in the moment. you're so very focused on the situation you're dealing with. It's all this so-called sage advice that you've read at your leisure, and the tomes of wisdom just gets tossed out the window as you're frantically trying to sort out the situation. The first argument someone has with their spouse, well, they probably read all sorts of things about relationships and received advice. They're probably not in a state to just stay calm, think about all the advice they've received, and then apply it. Right? You're dealing with someone else who's waiting for a response. And I think there's something analogous. Customers are waiting for a response. You need to get moving quickly, and you just tend to forget the measured voices which you've heard in the past.
Absolutely.
There is one thing, though, I think studying history does help, because it certainly can help calm you down. When you look at the history of startup stories, right, and you've gathered the fact that every startup beginning is a giant mess, right? As much as they pretend otherwise, it's the world's biggest mess with every startup in its own flavor. And when you realize this can actually help calm you during tense moments. You just realize you're no different, right? Who are you to have such a huge ego to think you're special? Well, you're not. Every startup has gone through this. And then you sort of, if you really are armed with a good spirit, you can perhaps shrug things off during moments of tension and go, well, I'm just like everyone else. I'll deal with it.
I wonder if there's a direct correlation between the success of a founder and their proneness to imposter syndrome. Because what you said was perfect, right? Like, who am I to do this? And then as you built out and sold the product, that kind of drive, that almost anxiety, right? Because it really is that anxious thought kind of probably drove you to really perfect your product as much as you could. Like, every time something went wrong, that imposter syndrome was in the back of your mind, and you were like, okay, I have to prove to myself that we are worth it. And in that process,
exactly,
you get a 10x improvement in your product.
What you are driven by, really, I suppose, in the early days, certainly, there's a marriage between fear and responsibility. It's really a fear of not messing up the responsibility you've taken, because it's really, you're not working in isolation. You've taken money from investors. You owe them something, right? They haven't given you money just to muck about. Right. There's a return behind the rainbow at some point, hopefully, that comes back. And your co-founder and whoever you end up hiring as well, you owe them. You've convinced them to join you on this journey, and so you owe them your utmost effort. Of course, most importantly, beyond everyone are the customers, the ones who've signed contracts and effectively put their jobs on the line. If you screw up, they've screwed up, which means their jobs are on the line. And it just becomes unavoidable. It really does not matter who you are, right? You will rush to fix things and make sure things are progressing in this environment.
Absolutely. So talk about that, because that is a very ambiguous space. Okay. So you took money from YC, not took money. You didn't rob the bank. They gave you money. Okay, let's clarify that. YC likes to give 7% for, I think it's 150,000. But what was that feeling like? Was that your first time raising money, by the way?
Yes.
Well, how does that feel when you raise money? Because I want to clarify the rational side of things. A lot of people think they raise money from investors, it's free money, and you touched on a good point. That's a post-money safe they give you, and the alternative to that is a convertible note. But either way, it's kind of convertible debt, right? So did that contribute into like further anxiety, or were you kind of level-headed about it? Speak about that from a first-time founder raising money.
Right. I mean, realize I'm certainly different now, having gone through the journey, and well, as early as it is, but trying to recall what I felt at the time. I mean, one, it's not actually debt. When you raise money on safe, there's really no debt to pay back. You owe them stock when you raise your Series A, but that's it. However, how did raising money feel as a first-time founder? Very briefly, you do feel pretty pleased with yourself. It's so early that any validation ends up mattering. Before I was a founder, I used to look at founders that celebrated fundraising, and I used to think, what are these guys doing? Who cares? Like, the real thing one should celebrate is revenue, it's customers, the things that matter. But then when you get in the game, what you realize is, well, it's so hard. Milestones are so few and far between that you'll grasp anything that counts as a milestone. And investor money tends to periodically show up, and so it does count as a milestone of some sort. It's an event that happens that doesn't quite repeat itself often. So we were pretty pleased. Our YC interview was just so weird that we actually left it thinking, okay, well, this isn't going to work out. Let's move on. And we just went home thinking, okay, yeah, who cares?
Wow.
It really did not go well as far as we were concerned.
Demo day didn't go well?
No, our YC interview.
Interview. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. When we're being interviewed, right? When you talk about fundraising, we thought they weren't going to give us money. We thought our interview just went badly and we just forgotten about it. So there was sort of an extra happiness when they did say you're in, because we weren't even expecting it. And of course, we felt pretty pleased with ourselves. What very quickly emerges in your mind is now the responsibility. Well, I signed up for something here. And demo date's showing up in 3 months. I don't quite get to take my time figuring things out in the Garden of Eden, again, where there are no real world pollutants. There are no deadlines. You're working on your own, no customers. Now we've got office hours every week with our partners and our cohorts, and everyone gives a status update. We'd better have updates ready every time.
Yeah.
So you do feel pretty pleased. It's very quickly replaced with, again, the sense of heavy responsibility that goes with it, and figuring out how you'll possibly meet it.
Yeah. Well, you met it. Congratulations.
Temporarily so, of course. Yeah, you do graduate, right? What you have to is, of course, you graduate. Patrick Collison from Stripe, I think, once said that as startups grow, the number of problems gets fewer, but each problem gets larger. And so you tend to just graduate to different levels of responsibility. It goes from this tiny bug is causing havoc, multiply that 20 times, to what's our marketing strategy, for example? What sort of employees do we want to hire? There are fewer questions, but rather bigger to wrestle with. It's not the sort of thing like a bug that you can fix in 15 minutes.
Yeah. You got to pull in experts in marketing and things of that nature.
So yeah, really scratch your head. But the point is just graduating. The feeling of responsibility does not go away. You just graduate to higher levels of it.
Yeah. So how big is your team right now since YC? It used to be just you and your co-founder.
It was until about 1 or 2 months ago. We're 5 people now.
5 people?
6.
6 people. Gotcha. And
yeah.
You probably forgot to count yourself. So, how did you go about those first hires? Like now speak from a founder's perspective in terms of, okay, now you have to build a team. You've created this little baby with you in Eden, essentially, right? If we're following that analogy. And now you have to bring in a team of people to take care of this product that you've created in its infancy stage. How do you go about that?
I've been a manager before, so it's not my first time recruiting. However, again, when you're starting a company, you've got no brand. It's sort of like trying to sell to customers. You just talk to people, sell them on your vision. And, the first question is, who are you? I've never heard of you. What are you doing? But for our first hires, we just have a mix. There were, a couple of people I know, just friends of mine who I've worked with in the past as well, who are vouched for. And then a couple of others who we just found on the internet. Just got lucky, went scouting, emailed a bunch of people, asked them to interview with us, and a couple ended up making through the process.
Were you entirely remote?
Yeah, because COVID, we are biased towards hiring in San Francisco or hiring people who are willing to move, but we are forced to be remote now. And so, yes, everyone's remote.
Nice. Was that easy in terms of the transition or no? Because part of being the founder, you want a good cultural fit.
Yeah.
It's tough to feel that out, right?
It's true. It's, this comes up on my mind every week, sort of every Monday I wake up and this is, one of a few constant things I think about. And I actually don't have settled answers just yet. I mean, certainly when you're just 2 founders, being remote is objectively worse than being in person. And why? Well, I think what I've coalesced on is remote works better for companies that have a fixed product and a well-defined roadmap that they're sort of just executing on. You can give everyone instructions and they're executing, but when you're, we have a bunch of stuff to create that is, well, it's filled with unknowns. There's actually some technical problems we have planned to solve where we don't really know the solutions yet or how things will work. And I think creative work, when you can't quite just grab someone and go to a whiteboard and then grab someone else who's nearby and bring them in and sort of collectively scratch your chins and scratch your heads at how the solutions could possibly look. Absent that, I do think remote work is inferior, objectively inferior when you're at the early stage. When you're really
a lot of
trying
ambiguous.
to get into creative work. Exactly that, the
A lot of
ambiguity.
ambiguity. Sorry, I said ambiguous. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we've certainly lost, one thing we've just lost is when we were in person, my co-founder and I would have lunch every day. And the casual conversations do occasionally spark some pretty decent ideas.
Yeah.
There's something about being remote where, well, every conversation feels like it has to be booked or reserved. You feel like it's such an onerous request to just interrupt someone and grab their time. There are no social cues where you can tell if someone's interruptible or not, like lunch.
Yeah. No coffee shop conversations. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything has to be a well-defined request. You've got these startups these days, there's a bunch of virtual space startups where your team can hang out in a virtual space. I think, we'll see whether that improves the situation or not. But certainly, very personally, I've just felt a loss at going remote.
Do you think you'll eventually own or open up like office space in San Francisco?
I think so. Yeah. The only question is, we do have one person who's remote, but it is someone who's a friend who I've worked with, who I've known for years. And so there's a cultural match there that one does not need to spend more time on, right? That's an exception we made. Yes, I reckon we'll get office space. It's an open question as to whether people show up every day or whether they show up for half the week. Maybe, I don't know, Thursdays and Fridays end up being remote days or in office days, as the case may be.
Yeah.
Unclear. It's very hard to tell, at least for me personally, what the right thing to do here is, as far as fully go back to normal or sort of half and half.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good balance because it seems like I saw a report. It was someone posted on LinkedIn. It was like 80% of people were like, I hope work from home never changes, and then there's people who miss the personal interaction and whatnot. So a good balance between the two would be great.
Yeah, it's unclear what balance means. The word balance, of course, is always appealing. Of course, the Platonic ideal is always appealing. Sign me up, right? But exactly what does the word balance mean?
Balance is always changing. That's the thing, right?
Yeah, it's true, right? Well, what are the right ways for your business and your employees, and for you as a founder too, right? You need to figure out the way that makes you comfortable. It's so hard to tell. Again, just leaning on history, it's almost impossible to predict what the future looks like when you're in an exceptional situation. World War II came and went, as horrible as it was, and people did not remain in a state of shelter in place tension when World War II went away. Actually, they rather quickly, in fact, rebuilt, and World War II became a sort of distant, formative memory, but still one that was in the past and done with. And I suspect something like that will happen after COVID. We'll just sort of forget about things 2 years from now and go back to normal. Maybe, right? Or maybe a few slight things change. It just feels so hard for me to predict anything, given where.
I think we'll tell our grandkids about it, right? Because they probably won't be able to compare it to anything. Yeah,
absolutely true. As to how we live day to day, is that different? I'm a bit skeptical there'll be much difference, but if there is difference, it's hard for me. I am a bit too cautious to claim predictions here, given history.
Yeah. What do you think? So now being at the stage that you're in and you guys have milestones to hit, like you said, they're few and far between and whatnot. For you in a stage of growth, are you focused on, sales team getting more sales? Of course, that's a primary focus. Or now, what's curious to me, are you still in that stage where you're like, how can we improve this product? Do we need to expand feature sets? Do we need to improve this? Are we doing, research and development, like more so than sales? Or how does that, what's that trade-off like? I know it's different for every company, but.
Sure. You can't really trade off is the harsh response. And so you do, yes, you tend to do a bit of all the above. The reason, of course, investors give you money is for you to avoid trade-offs. Before when I was coding, didn't have much time for sales. but you get money so that you can hire engineers so that you can stop coding and fully focus on sales, for example, right? Or marketing, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding plans, we've always had a pretty opinionated product roadmap. However, and so work will go on there for a while. There's always engineering work, just figuring out new ideas because we have a bunch planned. But customers do hit you with feature requests, right? There's bug reports, but there are feature requests too, things you didn't quite anticipate that they surface a need for. And you just work them in because your job is to make them happy. On the sales side, that also never stops because startups, it's a bit like the Leviathan, the mythical creature, the giant creature that just always needs to be fed. The startups are just hungry for growth and you constantly have to feed them growth. There's no running away from that. And so rather bluntly, if one can forgive me for this, the dull answer is all the above. If you can't do all the above, then you hire people so that you can do all the above.
Wow. Yeah, I can tell more and more you're a history buff, and it's impressive because being in the space that you're in, being a Y Combinator backed founder, you are going to be a piece of history. You're going to go down as a successful founder,
well,
one of the 8%.
I mean,
right?
maybe. It's actually that may be too bold a claim, as flattering as it is, and as tempting as it is for me to echo it. I think technology is actually a harsh mistress when it comes to the history books. I think Steve Jobs said this, where if you do the best successes in technology end up being, and this is the best case, end up being a tiny, tiny sediment in a giant mountain that is invisible except to the interested geologist. Right? Who remembers the first iPod when that came out? I mean, I certainly do because I bought one, but by and large, people don't really. Everyone's moved on. Who even remembers the iPhone 2 years ago? Well, a few people clinging on to it, but everyone buying the new thing, well, they don't care as formative as that was. And when you realize this, you actually tend to just shy away from any grand claims about history and so on. Yeah, I mean, where technology is it's really not like building a cathedral that stands for 1,000 years.
Yeah,
if you do a great job, you'll be obsolete in a few months.
Yeah, that's actually perfect the way you said that. I remember that quote. There's a video about that, but I believe it was also included in Walter Isaacson's biography about him. And it's just, it's crazy to see someone who is as successful as him quote that and say, our job is to become obsolete, right? To replace our own technology, because if we don't, someone else will a little bit later.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a fundamental responsibility, like you said, to lay that foundation and make it as sturdy as possible so that other people can build on it. And that's such a selfless way to go about a sacrificial lifestyle, right? I know that sounds intense, but you're sacrificing, you could get a job as an executive at another company, but being a founder that, you're locked in with your co-founder coding and remotely, but nonetheless, right? You're still locked in together, coding and living below your means and trying to build some kind of new and exciting technology. You're kind of going from being someone who is, prioritizing comfort and stability to someone who's going to adventure out and be a geologist and lay that next layer of foundation. And that's a really interesting analogy to make. Yeah. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's certainly true that this is not a life of comfort. I do not recommend it to anyone seeking comfort.
Unless they're obsessed with the product they're building, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, some people claim that this is something inherent in people, but I actually don't think it has to be inherent, and that people can switch to this mode. The mode being where one is attracted to situations of high responsibility, high risk, and high impact. This combination is not an easy one to bear. And, everyone has always said that, well, startups are even harder than you anticipate. They're always harder than you anticipate. And you listen to this and you go, yeah, fine. I've heard enough. It's clearly going to be hard. And yes, right, because humans are so bad at internalizing lessons. Not just that, you realize it is indeed harder than I anticipated. I agree with everyone. Everyone told me it will be hard. And yet reality still ends up being harder than you anticipate, just like they said it was going to be. So it's true, it's not a life of comfort, but sometimes you have an idea that's just so strongly tied to your own self. It's rather difficult to let go of it. It just feels like you do your own self a disservice if you don't at least try to see it through and see what happens on the other side. And
exactly.
that ends up driving you.
What was that, by the way? High impact, high difficulty, high responsibility, correct?
High impact, well, high risk, high
High
responsibility,
risk.
high impact.
Yeah. And we know all those things and we say, wow, he could just, work a good job with good benefits, good, good salary and
Sure.
all that, but nonetheless, you persevere.
Where you're not responsible, right? Where if you don't show up to work, right, where you can take a 2-week vacation and somehow the company keeps generating revenue because, well, you're not really tied to that.
Right.
And you can't do that when you're this size. I mean, anyone who disappears just causes a whole chunk of the company to ground to a halt until they come back.
Yeah. Wow. Wise words. Before we do the outro, I really want to give you the chance to say if you had any parting words, any advice for entrepreneurs, or founders per se, because I don't want to generalize to everyone's an entrepreneur, but someone who has some kind of idea that they want to pursue and maybe they're working a full-time job like we spoke about, and they're like, should I take this leap? Should I do it? What would be your best advice for them?
This one's a difficult one. I mean, I just tend to shy away from giving advice to people in general because I like to think that no one really knows anything. However, since you asked the question, I think the cost of failure is actually pretty low. And that's something people don't quite realize. So many people get so scared of failure, right? Well, what if this goes wrong? What if it does go wrong? I mean, you're blessed to be living in a country with plenty of jobs, for those with certain skills. And if you have the skills to consider starting a company, then you certainly have the skills to get a regular job if you need one, if things fail. And so just give it a go. The worst that could happen is, you lose it maybe a year or two of, saving money from some regular salary. But in a lifetime, what's that really?
Right. It's an adventure.
Right. Again, assuming you can do it, right? Again, certain people have obligations, family and what have you. But assuming you can do it if you choose to, there's really no reason not to give it a go. If you're okay with the stress and so on. But at the very least, you just learn things and you grow. It's like exercising.
Yeah, the cost of failure is low. That's refreshing.
Yeah, that's really the big one. It's way lower than people think.
Wow. Ghalib, thank you so much for joining, man. This has been a wealth
My
of
pleasure.
information. I loved how you connected, real life experiences today to history and lessons and analogies of the past. That was awesome.
It's just meanderings of an armchair philosopher at best. There's nothing too grand here, but I am indeed. It's been an honor and a pleasure, Ethan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now to give the audience definitely a way to contact you. Don't give out your personal email or anything. We don't want you to get bombarded by emails, but let them know how they can keep up to date with you.
Sure. Really, the easiest way is you can look at our website, www.polytomic.com. We have a Twitter account as well. You can follow us there and get the latest updates.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Ghalib.
Pleasure, Ethan.